Please join me in giving a big, warm town hall welcome to Peter DiCampo.
So thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to be here. I just got back from living for a year in Kenya, but I lived in Seattle for several years prior to that, and I'm back. Oh, here we go. This is way easier. And I'm back now for the time being. So I'm really, really happy. So thank you so much to the whole team at Town Hall for making this happen, and to the Northwest African American Museum. There are many more people to thank. I've got a lot of friends in the audience. My wife, Janelle Stewart, is here. Thank you for really making all this happen. And it just so happens that at the moment, a couple friends are visiting from Amsterdam who actually helped make this book possible. Toon van der Heijden and his wife, Sandra van der Dolen, who are the design team behind the book. So if anyone has like design and editing questions later, I would also love to force a mic into their hand, so if that happens. So thanks a lot for being here. So I'm really, really thrilled that there are so many teachers and students in the audience. This right here is really why Everyday Africa was started, why we do what we do. We do a lot of education work now, and we always ask, it's mostly with middle school students, and we always start out by asking this question: what comes to mind when you think of Africa? What's the first image that comes into your head? And many of them follow this pattern of like hunger, poverty, war, and then one kid says giraffe, and then they go into what I call the Lion King phase, and they just name every animal they can think of. This is the only classroom I've had where they actually, the first word was bad. So just something to think about. Everyday Africa started in March of 2012. I was traveling on a grant from the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. Crisis is in the name, so as you can imagine, we were traveling to document the aftermath of the Ivorian Civil War. In each of these next couple frames, the photo on the left is the photo that became part of my sort of news coverage of that event, and the photo on the right is what became an Everyday Africa photo. So on the left, so both of these photos are of the UN repatriating refugees, taking refugees back to their homes for the people who had not been home for a year. And so on the left, I've got this sort of like sad, uncertain African child looking off into the distance sort of thing going on, which to me is a huge sort of photographic cliche. I can say that because it's my photo. And on the right is the same group of refugees buying American action films from a guy selling DVDs on the side of the road, actually using their UN repatriation money to buy DVDs before returning home. On the left is a destroyed home. In the same exact village is a photo by the writer I was traveling with, Austin Merrill, who is the co-founder of Everyday Africa. So this is a home that had been destroyed a year prior at the end of the Ivorian War. And on the right, this guy came and was talking to us, and we were trying to ask him questions about the conflict, but all he wanted to talk about were the nightclubs he was going to and the music that he listened to and his life. He had since moved to the city. So a huge difference in the sort of priorities between the journalist and the people we are interviewing. Here on the left is a woman who was a rape victim during the fighting, and of course I've photographed her in a way that she's silhouetted and protecting her identity. And on the right, the woman that worked at the front desk of the hotel we were staying in while we reported this story. Now, obviously, I'm very concerned with these issues, and I want these photos to be evidence of this crisis, etc. These are important stories to be told, but we don't tend to see the photos on the right. We don't, as photojournalists, and for me as someone who had lived in West Africa for several years, both in a village and city setting, it was, I realized that there was so much more context to add to these stories, and that it did not. There was no way of getting it out. So we came back from that trip, and everyone said, well, you've got to join Instagram. And we were like, I don't really understand what that is, but we'll give it a try. And 5 years later, we now work with about 35 photographers on our Instagram feed. And they are all over the continent. Ooh, what a slip. They're all over the continent, in many countries, showing what daily life looks like. And we are thrilled to have over 365,000 people following us, which to us is evidence of just how many people are excited about this new form of storytelling and this new form of journalism. Just a few examples of the kinds of things you would see on our Instagram feed, and all of these are pictures you would see in the book. Because if we're saying that Africa is not just conflict and war and poverty, then what are we saying it is? So a marching band in South Africa, rollerblading in Senegal. This actually is another photo of mine. It's in Ivory Coast as well, so a luxury sort of resort swimming pool. College students taking their final exams in the Congo. A football stadium, I said soccer earlier and Charles corrected me. A football stadium in Zimbabwe. Models backstage at a fashion show in Nigeria. And kids playing on the beach in Ivory Coast. School picture day in the Kibera slum in Nairobi, Kenya. And a couple celebrating their 1-year wedding anniversary in Nigeria. And here we go, there's one that I've been using for years, and finally it looks very familiar. These are folks looking at an eclipse in Ghana. Most of the photographers we work with at this point are African, so if you were to scroll through the Everyday Africa feed, most of the photos you'd see would be people who are documenting their own country, their own cultures. This is just a brief sampling of some of their work. And that's been a very targeted mission for us as we add new photographers to sort of look at the gaps, you know, where do we not have people in the continent, and finding photographers in those areas. Now, as I was saying earlier, this has never been an attempt to pretend that, you know, a lot of people seem to want us to be a sort of PR campaign for the continent, to only show the sort of bright and flashy things, and I refuse to do that, and I always have. Just one quick example, this photo, almost 3 years ago to the day, this health worker working in Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis died of Ebola, and this is their grave. And I use this as an example because, you know, I got started in photojournalism right at that sort of pivotal moment between print and digital. And, you know, to me, flipping through photo essays about severe issues in a magazine, I always sort of felt like they had this otherworldly quality. They were so sort of immersively about that topic, and often shot in like grainy black and white or something, that you kind of had this like, it's over there feeling, it might as well be on Mars. And I distinctly remember scrolling through the Everyday Africa feed and seeing images like this surrounded by more of a normalcy, you know, dancing in South Africa, a wedding in Nigeria, whatever, and then when you land on this, to me it actually had much more impact than any sort of traditional news source ever had. Then, about a year after Everyday Africa launched on Instagram, we got what we called copycats at the time and what we call partners now. You know, these were folks, this is really exciting for us, because these were folks who had seen what we were doing in Africa and said, okay, this is a part of the world that's you know, important to them. I want to do this in my own part of the world, the part of the world where I'm from or have made my home. And now there are dozens of everyday projects all over the globe. So just to name a few, Everyday Asia was the very first one we saw. Everyday Middle East, which to me, other than Africa, is perhaps the most important. Everyday Latin America. Maybe I take it back. Maybe actually Everyday North Korea might be the other one that is the most important, especially right now. And then they started to get a little bit more specific than just geography. Everyday Black America is specifically black photographers photographing black lives. Everyday American Muslim, similarly, as Muslim photographers photographing Islamic life in the US. Everyday Climate Change, so now we are even getting issue-based ones, you know, showing us the daily impact of climate change on our lives. And we started a nonprofit after this and became the Everyday Projects, and that sort of serves as an umbrella organization for all of these various everydays, and well, I'll show you what else we do. So it's become a nonprofit dedicated to localized storytelling, visual literacy education, and how do we do that? So, of course, our social media is, you know, our sort of primary mechanism, our primary delivery vehicle for our photos, but we also work a lot with traditional media. This is National Geographic about 3 years ago now, the photography issue, a big anniversary issue for them. And I have to say, we've been published in many, many publications all over the world, and I always use the Nat Geo one as an example because I cannot think of a publication that has, done more to sort of propagate this stereotypical image of what Africa looks like. So to get our sort of alternate view in there has been really exciting for us. We have an educational curriculum. We do a lot of education work with our partners at the Pulitzer Center and Photo Wings. So this curriculum uses the Everyday Africa material first to engage students with their own stereotypes of what Africa might be like, to broaden their view beyond those stereotypes, and then to engage them in a conversation on how media representation affects them locally, how their own community or school or city is portrayed, and then the photos are used to teach practical photography lessons. We use Everyday Africa photos to teach angle and lighting and composition and all these kind of lessons. And then by the end of it, they have their own everyday blank for their own school, city, etc. So I actually just last night got back from DC. I was there for a few days, and this has been a really exciting development for us. We've been doing this education work for a couple of years, but this is the first time that we've been sort of officially part of a school system. Everyday DC middle schools, now their visual arts curriculum actually includes an Everyday DC unit. Did I say Everyday DC middle schools? I meant Washington DC middle schools. You know what I meant. So there are 12 middle schools that over the next few months will be using this curriculum, learning photography, photographing their daily lives, and then in January the kids will all have a big exhibition at a local gallery, and they'll all come together to share their work. Teachers, this is online, it is freely available for use. I'll give you the website later, but some Googling will get you there. So please make use of that. Please let us know that you are making use of it. We also do a lot of professional development work and trying to sort of elevate the careers and the work of the photographers that we work with globally, but particularly in Africa. So this is the African Photojournalism Database. It's something we worked on with our partners at World Press Photo. And Blink is a platform where you basically find freelance photographers, other creatives, but mostly photographers. So whenever an editor is like, oh, who is in Zimbabwe right now, they can sort of do a search and the names will pop up. And so it's this long database of African photojournalists because, of course, most photojournalism in Africa is still carried out by people who look like me. And that is part of what we are working to change. Getting into the book quickly before everyone comes up here to discuss the book. So why a book? It's already free, you can already go on Instagram and see all of these pictures, but we wanted to try to encapsulate what we've done. We wanted to make a physical object. We wanted to have an art object. We wanted to have something semi-permanent at least. We also wanted to explore how people communicate today. The book actually includes a lot of Instagram commentary, and the reason for that is that if this project is about examining how do we look at the continent and sort of dissecting many views of the continent, then in fact what people are commenting on our Instagram feed is part of the storytelling, is part of the journalism. This was the first photo that made me realize that. It's a photo of kids jumping rope. It's by the photographer Holly Pickett. And the Instagram comment, which is up here, says, "Why are Africans treated so horrible? I'm sad." And we were like, why is it so ingrained in us that even when we see, happy kids playing, we're like, oh, what's wrong in this situation? And the answer is nothing. Right? So there are many examples of that. This is sort of this presentation in brief, but we watch those comments go from often, straightforward racism, often sort of paternalism, like, oh, I'd like to go and help Africans, that kind of thing. And then there was this sort of arc of change over a lot of people commenting and saying, this is where I grew up, I'm so glad you showed this is the village I'm from, etc. And that was really exciting for us. When we took this book to Toon, the designer I mentioned earlier, who's here tonight, his immediate response was, if you are working on the stereotypes, then you can't just show the picture and the comment next to each other. You actually have to separate them so that people form their own opinion of the photo and then see the comment later on and are forced to sort of reconcile the differences there. So now the book is structured so that there are numerous pages of photography. There's our jump roping girl again. And then there are numerous pages of Instagram comments, so that pages later you have why are Africans treated so horrible. Now, if that sounds really, really confusing, it kind of is, but a little bit on purpose so that it forces you to do a little bit of work. And the way that you can tell which photo goes with which comment is that they're posted with the hashtags that the photo was originally posted with on Instagram. So that list of hashtags is there, and it is also here with the caption of the photo. It is really difficult to edit a book called Everyday Africa because Africa is a very large place. So basically we edited this. Nana Kofi Akwa, who is a Ghanaian photographer, one of our contributing photographers, made his sort of best of selection of our whole feed. Toon worked to put it in a flow that sort of made sense to him, just in a purely visual way. And then Austin and I had to step in and be the bad guys and say, well, now you've got, too many photos of Nigeria and none of Mauritania or whatever it was. So then this list is us listing out everything from every country and every photographer and then sort of balancing that. And it was a really interesting editing process because each time we had to do that, we were like, now we're destroying this book. It looked beautiful, but now we have to change it. And we would change it in a way that then in the end, as we worked those underrepresented countries and photographers back in, we would all end up much happier with the final result. So that was really wonderful. It was also interesting to edit it not only for country and photographer diversity, but also for subject matter, right? I mean, when we have a project called Everyday, I mean, whose everyday are we describing? Whose everyday experience are we trying to capture? And so the best we could do is to show a diverse range of subject matter. At the end of the book, we suddenly realized we had no photos of people gathering water, which for anyone that's ever been anywhere in Africa, you know that is a huge part of daily life, so we had to work images like this in. We also realized we had no pictures of mud huts, which again, this is not a PR campaign for Africa. And I also think we shouldn't look at photos like this and purely see poverty. I mean, this is just what daily life is for many people. So anyway, so we had to sort of work these things back into the edit. I'm going to close here in just a second so that we can have a really interesting conversation. But one quick look at what we are doing in the future. In the same way that we realized that the Instagram comments became quite interesting when you strip them of their original context and put them in the book, while we were doing that, it occurred to us that it would also be interesting to get them up on stage. So we've been experimenting with theater. We've been trying to remove the anonymity of the internet and see what happens. What do we learn when people have these Instagram conversations in person, live on stage? And that has been a lot of fun, and hopefully you'll be seeing more of that in the future. So that is the briefest of overviews of what our platform is all about, but you're going to learn a lot more now as we chat. So I would like to now invite up here, and I am really excited about this panel. I think we're going to have a really great conversation. So thank you all for joining me up here. Can we start with Charles Mudede, please? So Charles writes about film, books, music, and his life in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, the USA, and the UK for The Stranger. And I have to say, Charles, that I wrote to Kristen today and I was like, where did you get this Rhodesia, Zimbabwe thing from? Why are both of them listed? And she said that was how you sent your bio in. So I'm really interested in that. He was born near a steel plant in Kwekwe, Zimbabwe. Charles is also a filmmaker. Two of his films, Police Beat and Zoo, premiered at Sundance, and Zoo was screened at Cannes. Mudede has written for the New York Times, CinemaScope, Arts Electronica, Sea Theory, and academic journals. Thank you. Shukri Olow, please. Shukri is a member of the Kings County Best Starts for Kids initiative. Previously, she worked with Seattle Public Schools, where she focused on reducing chronic absenteeism and discipline for African and African American students. She serves on numerous committees and boards, bringing a local lens to international issues, including the Somali Health Board, Kent Youth and Family Services, and Famine Resisters, a platform committed to eradicating famine and waterborne diseases in Somalia. Saki Mafundikwa. According to AIGA, Saki is a maverick visionary who left a successful design career in New York to return to his native Zimbabwe and open that country's first school of graphic design and new media. Mafundikwa is the author of African Alphabets, a comprehensive review of African writing systems. He has participated in exhibitions and workshops around the world, contributed to a variety of publications and lectures about the globalization of design and the African aesthetic. His dynamic TED Talk from TED 2013 is entitled Ingenuity and Elegance in Ancient African Alphabets. And finally, Marie Kidhe, who you met earlier, one of our hosts here at the museum. Marie is the events manager here at the Northwest African American Museum, and she is a first-generation Ugandan American. Marie just made her first trip home, home is in quotes, home. She is less than 10 years ago. She is passionate about dispelling myths that misled her own views of Africa for many years. She hopes to inspire more people, especially African Americans, to travel to Africa. So this is really exciting for me. Out of all the many times that I've spoken about this project, this is the first time I've had the privilege of doing it in this format, and I'm just excited about the range of people we have up here, journalists, designers, community organizers. So I'm going to hand this off to Charles now, and let's chat. Thank you all.
Hello, everybody. I'll do my best. First of all, I've had this book beside my bedside for the past 2 weeks, and it's been like, I know if you have Instagram, yeah, you can do it, but it's nice just to see, really useful to see a picture that catches you, and then to go online and find that person and look at the other pictures on their feed. I mean, if you want to do, if anything else, if you'd ask like, well, how does this book really work, or why is it useful? It curates, in a sense, Instagram, and then it provides you with, like, you know, a way to access images that are just, because it's impossible to accidentally come across a lot of these images. You just can't do it. There's so much stuff out there. So in a way, if I would say this, I've done this with several images in this book, and I recommend, if you want to, you know, I recommend getting the book for that purpose. It's a great curating effort on that, you know, in that regard. Now, I want to talk today. It's a really fascinating subject for me, being an African, and about what our view of Africa is, because I had to grow up in both USA and in Africa, and had to see both ways of the way that my friends, when I was in the USA, saw Africa, and the way also when I was in Africa, the way they saw Africa and also the USA. And I just want to open with this sort of this insight, and I hope it's really useful to anybody who has to do this. And in a way, Peter sort of brought this up by saying that you shouldn't sugarcoat anything. That it's fine to talk about Africa as not being, you know, what we mostly think about it in the popular sense, right? I mean, let's face it. Not even too long ago, there was a movie that came out with Idris Elba, you know, The Beast of No Nation. I mean, I love that actor, but that view of Africa as being in a perpetual civil war, and kids shooting people and, you know, raping women, and I mean, it's really hard to tell somebody that I lived in Africa and I never saw that. You know what I mean? It's hard to say that I was there for 10 years, you know, every day, and I never saw anybody shoot anyone, right? And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I'm just like, my God, whoever made the film about the fact I never saw anyone get shot in Africa. So, no, that film is not there. But, never become complacent. And I'm going to open this with just this one statement. Never, ever love your country too much, and never, ever not hate your country too much, right? I mean, I always tell people, love and hate who you are. Love America, hate America. Love Africa, hate Africa. I mean, there are things to hate in Africa, and they're legitimate, right? The attitudes that men have towards women are awful, often the time. Don't act like they're not there. Hate them, right? In the same sense, never become like a full lover of your country and just ignore all the crap and bad stuff that's there. And in a way, that's a difficult thing to communicate to people because, you know what I mean? It's a higher, to me, realization of your, because we come from Africa and we have to deal with the fact that we're told that we're the worst continent on the earth and we have all these problems and so forth and so on. And it's hard to say, yes, there are things we have to hate about Africa. It's hard to say that. But I can tell you that there are things you have to hate about the USA, right? And I'm just saying that no matter what, and the things you can love about the USA, the things you can love about Africa as well. And so that's what I want to say, right? So I'm not against hating aspects of Africa, but we have to come from a position where we often are receive images where there's nothing to love about Africa, right? And I think we overcompensate, and in a way we have to overcompensate with our, you know what I mean? With our, we do selfies here too, by the way. Right, we're just like anybody else. We go to nightclubs and, we dance to the latest hip hop or whatever, or we make our own hip hop. I mean, we get that. We know it's not surprising to anybody who's in Africa that you're a human being, right? It's not, I mean, you know what I mean? It's not surprising that you can go out and meet humans doing stuff like he was describing, going to a nightclub and wondering if he's looking sharp. I mean, that's found anywhere in the world, right? And so but we have to remember the balance that, sometimes, that's my point. So that's what I wanted to open with. But I wanted to really get into a discussion that, and I want to start also, I want to start from the left to right. I want to start with Maria, and I wanted to open with you and to say, in a way, and to go down. I mean, you've seen this presentation, and I know that I was fascinated about why, considering all this, why you put home in quotation marks.
I think for me, so my parents are both Ugandans, and they came here essentially the beginning wave of the African movement to this part of the country. So for me, being someone who didn't go to where my family, all of my family, every single person in my family is from until my early 30s, it was more of an identity type thing for me. I've been in Seattle almost my entire life except for 6 years, and had never been to Africa, had never been to Uganda where my family is from, and so it was many years of a disconnect. So to put it in parentheses or into quotes was essentially to state that I feel like for me that origin is my home, and Seattle is my home as well, but those are my roots. The way people seek out their genealogy and so forth, there's no confusion for me. I know exactly where I'm from, so that's home for me.
Were you shocked when you first went to Africa? What did you, I mean, considering the images and that we were bred or we were raised with? I grew up in the U.S. education system. I knew that there were sort of expectations about what Africa is and so forth and so on. I mean, what was your,
I mean, so it's twofold. Essentially, I grew up in a household with Africans. We had African parties, I went to African events, I heard a language in my home my entire life, so I had that piece every day. And my brother, who's actually younger than me, went to Uganda 10 years prior than I had. So he actually beat me there and was there in his 20s. And so I think for me, it got to be a point of almost anxiousness,
right,
and a little bit of envy because he had beat me there, so he had something on top of me that I didn't have. But I feel as if the first time when I was supposed to initially go, which was when he went in his 20s, Yes, I was definitely nervous, and it led to me not going also because of a job offer. But by the time I went 10 years later, I cried when we got to the airport. I didn't want to leave. And so it was one of those things where it was a full circle, if you will, and I was able to finally feel like, okay, I have come to where I need to be at. I'm finally feeling settled in who I am, and it gave me a lot of inspiration. I actually came back and acquired a degree in international business and got this lovely job here, and have spent the last 10 years of my life just trying to do the best that I can in this area of bringing what I feel is both sides of me together, my American side and my African side.
Thank you. I have to tell you, when I returned back to Africa for the first time after a long break, and I was 12 years old, and I arrived in Lusaka. I arrived at the Harare airport. And the first thing I want to know is, I just came from the USA, I want to know what was on television that night. And I heard 8 is enough. And I said, okay, I can live here. That was a relief to me. Oh, 8 enough is showing in Zimbabwe. I'm good. Speaking of Zimbabwe, Saki, I know that I actually know that you have a deep sort of relationship with how, or you have a long history of thinking about imaging and images and how we think about Africa, right? In terms of like, I know that even in your work, you're constantly, I mean, what was described by Peter was basically, a lot of that is in your work in terms of like, how do we rethink Africa in terms of, for you it's often its past, but I wanted to launch into just, considering the book and considering your own project in rethinking Africa.
Well, first, I wish you would stop referring to Africa. Don't talk about when I went back to Africa. Talk about when I went back to Zimbabwe. Because Africa, man, how many countries? 54? 54. Yeah. That's a lot of countries, So, hey? Oh, louder. Well, I am a soft-spoken kind of guy. All right. Africa, my home, having said that, I'm a Pan-Africanist. I'm from Zimbabwe, but my passions are for Africa as a whole. I guess you could say I'm from the old school, and I wear that as a badge of honor. And by that I mean I'm really into history, the historical perspective towards Africa, because my thinking is that in order to move into the future, for Africa to move into the future, we actually have to embrace our past, which is a glorious past, So when you talk about Africa, to me, it's always, I'm thinking about Timbuktu, I'm thinking about Egypt, I'm thinking about Nubia, all the achievements, that history, Western history, has sort of like swept under the carpet. That's really where my blood starts to boil when we get to that. And they called it the Dark Continent. And the history that I know, that I've researched, show that, these French anthropologists say that the dark referred to the fact that Africa didn't have writing, but Africa invented writing. And Africa has always had writing. Even at first contact with the Europeans, they found writing in Africa, but it was sort of like it wasn't regarded in that sort of regard as like writing, was like, oh, and the natives had this kind of like chicken scratch thing that they did. Oh, how cute. And I'm saying, hell no, you know. I don't know if you're going to go into the images.
Yeah, we will.
Okay, because I think you'll discover why I picked the image that I picked.
Good.
Yeah, do you have that image?
We don't have that image.
Oh, Charles.
Sorry.
I sent it to you.
No, I know. Yeah, right.
Page 289, can you find it? Yeah. Because that's central to my thinking, really, about Africa. 289, yeah.
It's the one with the hand over.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
that one there. Of all the images in the book, this one was the most profound to me and meant the most to me.
Anyone know how I get that to be there?
You're connected?
There you are.
Oh.
Yeah, I got it.
There you go. Okay, the caption on that loosely says that this is a Darfur refugee, refugee camp in Chad, and that this man here is a healer, and he uses writing to heal. This is what he does. He creates all those characters, right? This is Arabic, by the way. And as he's dipping the pen with the ink into the water and then making the marks, right? Say a family has come and they have a sick relative and they want to be healed. So he creates some healing using writing, and then he gives the family the jar of water where he was dipping the ink to go and give to the sick person, and because the relatives believe in his powers, the sick person is healed. Not that different from the placebo effect that you use here. So it's all in the faith. So the power of writing, writing has been used throughout history, sometimes for selfish, for power, reasons. Like for instance, CBD from Nigeria. If you're not an initiate, you can't even see it. You're not allowed to look at it. If you do, well, you might lose your life in the past. I don't think it's the same now. But so it was used to, as a tool of power by certain groups. I'm really interested in that. Really. And I feel like I've come to, I'm sort of like a world-renowned typographer, but from an African perspective, that we don't have to accept the writing systems that we have. We can create new writing systems. And Africans have so much inspiration, so much to inspire them from the ancient writing systems that we have, some of which I highlighted in my now out of print book, African Alphabets. We're trying to get it back into print. So for me, my Africa, right, the future of it depends on our past. Those great achievements, the pyramids, Great Zimbabwe, you can name them, the list is long, which were never in the history books that all of us here in this panel read in school. There was a reason why that was hidden from us. And my mission is to bring that to the fore, to especially Africans, so they can sit at the table of achievement and have the same pride, you know, that the others have. Even for things that they discovered, that they invented, they're told, you know, that was stolen away from them and repackaged and then sold back to them, and they were told, this is the truth, this is the history. That's his story. Now it's time for our story, to tell our own story. That's what I stand for.
Well, I wanted to just, for my next question. Oh, there you are. There you are. Sorry. I think Zimbabweans have a way of like wanting to whisper something. I want to get in. I'm sorry to bring in nationalism at this moment, but I really wanted to bring up the questions that of course, my thumb thing is not to me. I want to bring up the questions. Now Shukira, is that correct?
Shukri.
Shukri, I asked you a question of what everyday Africa meant to you, and you brought back 3 answers, and they're all interesting to me, and I wanted you to see if you could elaborate on them. You said everyday Africa means to me, right? 1, simple; 2, resilience; and 3, rising from the ashes. And I wanted to ask if you could elaborate on those 3. Give us what you meant, and considering what we've been looking at and putting it in that context.
Charles, that's just really rude not to speak into the microphone. The people who have hearing impairment, please.
Yeah. But you know, also, it's just I'm neglectful. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? Sometimes I'm not used to holding a mic and all every day of my life. So you know, I'm not a pro, as they say. Yeah. So, in respect also that I don't do this every day of my life. Thank you. All right. Yes?
Let me suggest a way to overcome that. Could you hold the mic down lower?
Well, how'd that help then?
Put your hands lower on the mic.
Oh, like this?
Yeah.
Like that? Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry. yeah. All right.
Thank you, Charles, for that question. Are you able to hear me? Great. Greetings to all of you. Thank you so much for having us, the folks at Town Hall and Northwest African American Museum. And Peter, thank you. I can't thank you enough for the work that you do. Oftentimes we see the other side of Africa, the stories of horror, of victims, of violence, of poverty, of one lion. There's always that one lion. I don't know what happened to the rest of the herd of lions. A hut somewhere. And that's unfortunately the image that people have of the continent, and they don't see it as a continent, as one country. They see it when they say Africa. Oh, I've been to Africa, and I'm always wondering which part. 54 countries, you haven't been to all of them, right? But to get back to your question, I am originally from Somalia. And I came to this country when I was 10 years old as a refugee from Kenya, like many of us have, endured a lot and have been very resilient in overcoming a lot of the trauma that we experience, as many immigrant and refugees often do, and sort of airdropped in the middle of nowhere in Texas. Texas is sort of a different country in a lot of ways. I remember reading about them wanting to secede from the nation, and in hindsight, oh, that makes sense, kind of. No offense if there are any Texans here. And, you know, grew up, left, immigrated from Texas after a year to Seattle, Washington, where I spent most of my childhood and went to graduate school here. We're raising 2 amazing children here as well, and see this as home. And for the first time since '91, when I was 3 years old, went back to Somalia just this past May. And I've been yearning to go back literally every single year for the past 7 years. And my mother, who remembers what it was like to endure the violence of 1991 and the civil war that we had in my country, refused. And I'm a mommy's girl. And so I listened, and I waited. And I just kept waiting. And every year I would try again. Mom, can I go this year? Nope. Okay. We'll wait. And so this year, we were fortunate to have a new president, Hamid Abdullahi Farmacho, and my mother allowed it. And mainly because I didn't tell her I'm going to Somalia. I told her I'm going to Kenya, but at the time she didn't know. And when I went back, I have never experienced the simplicity of life that I've experienced there in my life. There's something about the rush and the constant go in this country, and particularly in the West, it feels like. And I went with my sister, and she also was 2 at the time and didn't remember anything. And we landed in Aden at the airport and kissed the ground at the airport, and they automatically knew we were diaspora kids. And we drove into town dressed as locals and drank tea and didn't look at our watch. We didn't even carry a watch, or our phones, and just lived life. Like, I can't even explain to you what that feeling felt like. I'm sure, Marie, you can relate going back to your nation of birth. So it was simple. What was the second thing that I said?
Resilience.
Resilience, yeah. And my picture, I think, when we get to it, will explain it. But many refugees, immigrants, and human beings in general, when I used to work for Seattle Public Schools, and so I know a lot about trauma and the impact of trauma and what it does to people in general. But we have a way of coping, of overcoming the challenges that we face in life, but particularly as an immigrant and refugee, to overcome war, to overcome poverty, and to not have it be generational, and to be to be living that quote-unquote American dream, which I feel isn't so real anymore as I get older, but to feel like you made it is resilience, and that's something that we're all capable of, and that we all have in us as human beings. And third one I think was rising from the ashes, because I feel that the continent, all 54 countries, have gone through tremendous challenges. We have gone through, before slavery, we had a history. Before colonization, we were dynasties, kings and queens in our own land, with our own text, oral traditions that were passed down generations, and people who had a sense of pride and dignity when they walked, when they spoke, when they dealt with other people, respect, and particularly for our elders and for our traditions. And then slavery happened, and I think things changed that. Especially in the western part of the continent. And then colonization happened. In my home country of Somalia, for example, the Italians colonized one part, the French colonized another, the British colonized another. 3 Western powers in one tiny country who sliced and diced a small nation. Called it Djibouti, called it Somaliland, called it Somalia, called it their own for centuries. And during the 60s, I think it was Ghana who became the first African nation to become independent, and that was followed by many other African nations who fought for freedom and for the dignity of their people. And we had amazing leaders like Thomas Sankara and Kenyatta who were pivotal to that, that movement. And we've endured a lot, but there are many nations who know what conflicts do, who know our history, and who are committed to moving forward. And I think, you know, the Rwandans of the world who know what genocide is like, Somalia, who I think is on a path to recovery, South Africa, and all of these nations have challenges for sure, but we're rising, and I think we'll get there one day, soon.
An interesting, thank you. I want to go to Peter here for now and ask a really, maybe a difficult question, right? I know that the project, when I was going through the book and I saw a lot of the images, some of them, you know, they were countering the standard narrative of what Africa should be, or what Africa is like, maybe a jungle, maybe full of conflict and all this stuff. But do you think that in a way, when we look at what's happening in Africa, and when we see images, say somebody, you know, going to a, you know, having a good time or something like that, and it's not that it's counter that people do have a good time, but I was wondering in your situation, in your vision of Africa, my only one thing that I did notice is that a lot of people here, and may not, and also in the USA, don't understand that the context for a lot of those, for the poverty. Do you know what I mean? Like those wars, like you were showing us the picture of people being repatriated and so forth and so on, but those wars don't come out of nowhere, right? Those are economic wars, right? And Africa is caught up in the global economy. You know what I mean? And so to me, I mean, there's a side where you can say, yeah, we get the DVDs and all that stuff, but there's also a side that says we are heavily exploited, and we're not just a, right? We're not just a we don't receive. Actually, Africa does not receive as much aid as most Americans think that we do. Actually, we're a major exporter of capital. You wouldn't believe this, but Africa has bought something to the tune of $100 billion worth of T-bills in the USA. So actually money's going out. And it's not just white people, it's also Africans who are rich, who would not invest in their country, but would prefer to buy securities and T-bonds in the USA. So the money goes right back to, so I'm just saying, when we look at Africa, you look at what's going on, I mean, you have to like, how do we see this economic picture through your pictures?
Yeah, wow, okay. Yeah, great question. And not the difficult question I was expecting to be asked. Well, I guess I would start by briefly saying that, you know, that presentation was the sort of abbreviated version of what I normally do, but it's interesting the direction you're heading, because that first trip that I was showing photos of, the Ivory Coast trip, you know, normally I go much more into the conflict, which is an interesting conflict because a lot of it was fought over cocoa beans, and you know, it was basically Ivory Coast provides a third of the world's cocoa, and so you know, it's farmers. You know, the who owns the rights to the farmland is becomes heavily politicized, and then it becomes far too easy for politicians to sort of stir both sides into a frenzy to fight over that. Now, you know, Ivory Coast supplying 1/3 of the world's cocoa means that if we've all had chocolate recently, then that means there's a decent chance that it came from Ivory Coast. So very much, I mean, that, you know, that plays right into what you're talking about. You know, this sort of commodification of Africa. But it's interesting because yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you are making me immediately want to go. I mean, I guess what I would say is that the entire lens has to shift, right? Of how we and a big part of that is that journalism has to shift. And there's this, you know, there's just this entire sort of accepted narrative of how things should be, and the sort of NGO narrative gets pushed very much into the journalistic narrative, and that I feel like those numbers that you're talking about, I mean, they were just recently, and now I'm trying to remember where they were published, but a couple articles that went very deep into the numbers you're talking about, the amount of money that goes in, the amount of money that comes in, comes out, the sort of idea of Africa bankrolling a lot of the Western world. I mean, basically what you're making me feel like is that it hasn't gone far enough, and that maybe Everyday Africa is sort of like a starting point of like saying, hey, we need to look at things differently. Actually, what you're making me feel like is that a lot of the photographers have been saying, when can we do like one group investigative reporting project? And that would be a killer first project for us, is to get, especially since we're, they're all spread out across the continent and could sort of take off chunks of that. But I guess what I'm getting at is that, I mean, there's even when I describe group projects like that, I mean, I feel like there's so many sort of agencies, photography agencies or grants for journalists or whatever, and they're sort of centered around one. They'll often be sort of themed, and it'll be a theme of like, something like I talked about, like commodities, or a theme of like women's health, or and it would be such a major shift to get it to be about something that pushes out of that NGO driven, that pushes us into us, to get a theme on the table for one of those, to see like whether it's the Pulitzer, a call for applications for a journalist grant on like, I don't know, this sort of complete shift. I don't feel like I'm doing a great job describing it, but it would take such a further shift.
Heads up, we'll have like one more question, and then we'll open up to audience Q&A. And if you have a question, please just line up and use the microphone here.
Yes. Go ahead, Saki.
Yeah, I just want to say that you keep talking about, is this loud enough? Okay. You keep talking about the West, like the money coming to the West. But there's a new show in town, and that's China. Like, most of our autocratic governments don't bring their money here. They take it to China. Last year, Zimbabwe, the president, Robert Mugabe, went on TV, national TV, and said that $15 billion of diamond returns went missing. 15 billion. I just want you to wrap your head around that. 15 billion US dollars, okay? That didn't make its way here in treasury bills. It's in China somewhere, Singapore, Malaysia, or China. That's the new haven now to hide the money. I just needed to throw that in.
Okay. Yeah. I also just as a last question to the group, I just wanted this to be a general question. If you can answer it, do you worry about romanticizing Africa? I mean, being people that we are, we come into, is there a danger of romanticizing in our images, in our memories, in our thinking of Africa? I always worry about this, but I want to know if there's that danger sometimes.
I don't think there's that danger because that's never been what people see, right? You can't over-publicize or over-show something when it's never been shown. The only things that people know of the continent are violence, wars, poverty, all the things that I mentioned earlier. People don't know about the beaches of Mogadishu, which I had the pleasure of seeing, white sandy beaches that are, and I've been to Hawaii 3 times, more beautiful than Hawaii. The coast of the Somalia, obviously, which has the largest coastline in Africa, the beaches of Malindi in Kenya, I'm a beach person, and so I could just lay there with my cup of tea and a good book, and I just sit there. But you know, the reserves in South Africa, like in Uganda and Rwanda, like people don't see the beautiful images of the continent, right? And so there's no way to show that because people don't see it. And as Peter mentioned, both realities exist, just like they exist in every continent, in every country. In this country, of poverty, of violence, of victims being raped, of disparities in all the systems that we have, be it healthcare, education, whatever, it exists here at home. And so the media doesn't show that, though. We only show what feeds people and what creates division and what sells. And it's certainly not the positive.
Right? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I wonder if Charles, what you're actually asking is if there's a danger as we fight to change the narrative, is there a risk of overly romanticizing? And I think that's a complicated question because, I mean, well, I mean, I don't want to repeat things I just said earlier, but, it's essentially like we've very much resisted being this PR campaign, but, one could argue that if your goal is solely to change people's minds about Africa, maybe you should inundate them with the beauty, with the natural beauty, the positivity. But I refuse to do. I mean, I guess I just refuse to go in a two-dimensional way on one side or the other. And I mean, I just despite a lot of evidence to the contrary, I try to retain a sense of optimism that if you show people as three-dimensional, then I mean, there's a great actually written essay in the book by Stephen Mays, who's a sort of photography and art critic, among other things, and he talks about how, I mean, to put it quickly and simply, I mean, if we take for so many issues, photography has become something of symbol or trying to make an icon, trying to make a single person into an icon for an entire, like the Ebola photo or the Rwanda genocide photo or something like that. But if we try to assign people many roles in the photography, then it becomes a lot more like life, where we also each have many roles that we have to our lives. So.
Just very quickly, I think that the inclusion of African photographers in this project really is the kind of like the barometer to make sure that Africa is not over-romanticized.
If you have a question, come on up. Don't be shy. Students, you should be used to asking questions a lot.
I have a question. I think it's mostly probably for Peter, but I think I would also be interested. I would also be interested to hear what other people say. So I wasn't familiar with this project before I saw the invitation for tonight, and so I think I was under the impression that it was like everyday people in Africa who sent you pictures and then you posted them on your Instagram. So I didn't know that it was professional photographers. And I just wondered, and I think that there's definitely a place for that as far as letting people know about their work and their skill set. But I just wondered, if it seems like Instagram has sort of been a democratization of like sharing photographs in the United States, and I know there's tons of people with cell phones in Africa, and I just sort of wonder, what do you think the images might be that people who aren't professional photographers around the continent might give you as opposed to what you have, and if you've ever thought about that.
Yeah.
Just really quickly, everybody, the question is, the photographs in the book are done by professionals, and what she wants to know is what would happen if the photographs were taken by ordinary people, because in Africa there's cell phones and people take pictures all the time. And so would the book be different if it wasn't professionals, but just ordinary Africans with cameras posting stuff on Instagram?
Yeah, thank you. That's actually I don't know where you went, but wherever you went, thank you. That's actually a really great question. A couple of responses. One is that, just as we've always paid a lot of attention to the commentary on the Instagram feed, we've also paid a lot of attention to who is using Everyday Africa as a hashtag and what that imagery looks like. Every Friday we do Follow Fridays of posting for the day photos that have been sort of submitted in that way as a way of sort of showing what do our audience members, how do they perceive those two words, Everyday Africa. And several of our contributors actually are people we found in this way. And it is worth noting, I mean, I was saying that these are shot by professional photographers, but there's a little bit of a caveat to that actually some of them it is not their sort of full-time gig and they didn't go to school for it and they're not working professionally, it's just sort of an active hobby. So actually some of these, Barry Christensen, for example, is one of our contributors in Cape Town, and he is a software developer. We have an Egyptian, Mahmoud Khattab, he's actually a doctor. So there are several Everyday Africa contributors that are whose pictures are in the book and regularly on the feed that are not professionally trained. And the other thing is that our website, which if you just go to everydayprojects.org, the website is set up to allow you to jump quickly from Africa to Asia to the Middle East, etc. And to see, it's actually aggregating content in a way that allows you to see the raw Instagram feed, or you can click over from an Everyday by Us tab to an Everyday by You tab that is aggregating the hashtag so you can actually see everything that's out there that has been hashtagged Everyday Africa. And it was very important to us to have this sort of community involvement. I think it would certainly be interesting to add that to a book. We thought a lot about whether that material belongs in this book. I can imagine that Toon and Sandra are getting a headache right now thinking about the logistics behind that, because I certainly am, and how do you get their rights and permissions and how do you edit such a thing? But it would be totally worth doing, and I'd be really interested. I mean, maybe it's one of our future projects. As far as the type of thing they photograph, I mean, I guess the quickest way to answer that is that in many ways they're these types of things. They're not necessarily that different. Maybe there's a quality difference, but maybe there isn't a lot of the time. So, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Please, yes.
This might come out a little funny, but I want to ask the question about where we go from here. So there's a lot of, I'm involved in race and social justice and race equity, and a lot of our posture at this point in time is conversation. This is kind of a conversation. It's also an exposure to images, of course, that we don't typically see, which is kind of like, hi, I'm black, you're white, let's talk.
I'm not Chinese.
Okay. All right, so we're all done. So that's kind of where the race...
It's a good thing you have that conversation.
Yeah. But that's kind of the way the context of the overall movement is right now. And so I want to ask, whoever would like to respond, where do we go from here to actually change things? I mean, we got the most obvious, Make America Great Again, which is kind of like what, in the 50s and the 40s. What are you talking about again? What does that look like? How do we do this so that make the world great in the sense of forward? Yes, so that's my question.
So here's the question. Anybody can answer this. It's open. After we've represented ourselves in a sort of, you know what I mean? After we've had an exposure of, as to the narratives, the multiple narratives that have been neglected or ignored, where do we go from that point? After representation, what do we just go to sleep? Do we just call it quits? Do we say it's done?
Holding mic.
Your right hand, your left hand's got too much control.
Multitask. I think that's a large question, and I'd like to reduce it down a little bit just because I feel like everyone has their own individual part. A lot of times we put it under one big umbrella, like what are we all going to do? But we're not all going to do the same thing. For me, especially, I think my path has been to expose my community, meaning the people that I engage with and the people outside of that, about the greatness that I see when I go home and visit my family in Uganda. You had spoke about what do ordinary Africans in whatever country they're at photograph, and some of these photos are great representation of that. I follow all of my relatives, my young cousins who are Instagram, and they take pictures of the party they were at last night or the event that they went to the day before or the new hut that we built in our village or whatever. So there's a lot of reflection in these photos. I think the bigger thing that people need to do is to be more honest with themselves about what they've been exposed to and how they see Africa. I think that's the biggest thing and the first step, at least for me, that I would suggest. People need to realize that these 54 countries have greatness beyond, and without them, no one would be sitting here. And so what does that look like? It could even start with, making sure that you add a different kind of restaurant to your palate instead of it always being limited to what you eat every day, or engage in a conversation with someone who doesn't look like you, who has a different perspective or a different idea of where they've been through and where their path lies and where they're going. And to me, that would be where I would begin.
I actually think that the kids, especially the school kids who came here today, are really the place, they're the people who should be here, and we should be seeing these images and, engaging in this because, because I'm not going to say it this way, but the older people, right, they are conditioned, and it's very difficult to get through to them. These are the future leaders. And I'm so happy that a lot of the images were of children or young people. They can relate to that, So their view of Africa is going to be different from the view of Africa of us, the older fogies.
Thank you for mentioning that, Safi. I was just going to say that exact point, that Everyday Africa and now Everyday Projects is actually headed in the right direction by partnering with school districts, because I feel, and you young people are a reflection of, our future and what is possible, what potential we have. And it all starts in the curriculum, what our kids are being taught. I have two, a kindergartner and a second grader. I'm not that old, and they're being taught history that I was taught, which isn't the honest truth. It's their story. It's not necessarily ours. And so by going into the schools, by working with school districts and looking at the curriculum, by helping to create ethnic studies programs, like I think as Seattle Public Schools was trying when I transitioned from SPS, by teaching kids their background, the dignity of their people, and to take pride in who they are, I think that's the start. And that's what this project is aiming to do. So you're definitely headed in the right direction, in my opinion.
Yeah. Are we done?
Yeah.
We're done. I just have one last comment then. One last comment from me. Mic on my mouth. I just want to say, if anybody really wants to make a connection between what's going on in the USA and what's happening with this project, it's very simple. What has happened over the years when we've watched movies and so on has been this systematic dehumanization of Africans, right? we've been made to look less than human, and therefore, right, for some reason, our problems and the crisis can then just be blamed on us being less than human, that, and so forth and so on. Oh, sure, go ahead. Look here, a person just stood up.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
ask one more question?
Yeah.
I have a little sister and 2 nieces and 2 nephews. How should I expose them to this other side of Africa? Because I have a wonderful teacher, Miss Russell, who is teaching me this stuff, but I do not think that they're getting exposed to it. How would you suggest that I help them?
Oh, thank you. Well done.
Was
Anybody? That's a question for the whole group.
Are they able to transfer schools and have Miss Russell as a teacher? Okay.
I mean, and maybe that's actually the real answer to Preston's question is you know, if you're learning it, pay it forward and get it on to the next person as well. I mean, I guess I would say there's a reason that all of this work lives online, whether it's the Instagram feed, whether it's the curriculum. You know, please sit down and share it with them yourself a bit. Tell your teacher to tell other teachers. I mean, all of this work is there. I would love to come in and speak to some of these school groups as well and show them more work. You know, all the materials are there. We just got to put the pieces together. So, yeah, thank you very much.
What school do you teach at, Miss Russell? Where is it located?
I think that a natural progression for this project is a everyday African child sort of book, where you give the kids in Africa cameras and they record their lives. That really would be the best way of connecting with the kids here.
All right, so just to we have to close up, but I just want to say thank you so much for the question, but just remember right now that I think that the Black Lives Matter movement makes a lot of sense when you look at the images here. It just reminds you that these lives matter too, right? I mean, this is what it comes down to. Black Lives Matter is not about, it's about don't dehumanize us. That's all it's saying. It's not saying all lives. It's just saying don't dehumanize me. I'm a human being. These people you see in the pictures, these people are human beings. This is the only argument being made. If that is missed, then we're lost. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Peter, Marie, Saki, Shukri, and Charles, thank you so much. Audience, Peter is going to be at the back table selling